Hello everyone, and welcome back to the series on reading music. This time I'll be explaining the notation of duration, how they are presented, what do they do, how to use them, and how to understand them. Just like how pitch is presented on the staff in a certain way, the duration of the pitch is also presented. The duration is basically for how long that pitch should be played. There's a lot of factors to deciding how much, like it's basically the relative, right? It depends on a lot of things, but the basic idea is what I'll be presenting right now, and in the next video I'll be presenting more of that idea. But the pitch, again, is presented basically on where is it on the staff, like is it on a line, or is it on a space, is it above or below? But the duration is presented in a different way. So let's talk about those durations. Unlike the pitch that is presented by the placement on the staff, the duration is presented by a symbol. So let's start off with the symbol. That's what we call a whole note, which is the longest known duration in Western music. There is, historically speaking, a longer one, which we call a breve, a double whole note, which looks exactly like this, but with lines on the side. This one, it isn't used anymore. Like, I think in the last 300 years, really, nobody used those. Historically, they were for Renaissance and church music and stuff like that. But nowadays, this note is way too long for basically any kind of performance, for how we understand music nowadays. So we're not going to be talking about the double whole note unless you want to do Renaissance music. You won't really encounter that. I might do a lesson on Renaissance music, counterpoint, if you want me to, but for now, I'm going to stick to Western music. This is the longest common duration we call a whole note. Now, I want you to think of the whole note as the number one. That will be clear in a second on why. That's what we call a whole note, and equals the number one. It's the longest duration we use nowadays. The second longest is half as much as the whole note, which is a half note, which is of course equal to half. And next we have the quarter note, and the quarter note is basically a quarter in value. If you know basic math, you'll know that a quarter is half as much as the half note, and the half note is half as much as the whole note. So that means the whole note is 4 times larger than the quarter note. It's basic math, right? And that's why I was to present the numbers. And you can see the pattern at this point. Each time we're going half the value of the previous note. So if you know basic math, again, this one should be a eighth note. Eighth note equals 1 by 8. Then we have the 16th note, which is presented like that. I'm going to write those actually in here to make it simpler to read. Then we have the 32nd note, one by 32nd, and finally we have the 64th note. 64th note, 1 by 64, and it looks like this. I'll explain how they're presented. We'll start off with the whole note. The whole note is basically a circle, like a little deformed circle, and it looks like this. The half note, it looks kind of similar to the whole note, just a little pointed upwards, but with a stick pointing out. We call the stick a stem. It's known as a stem. And the quarter note is presented the same way as the half note, but it's fully colored black. The eighth note is presented the same way as the quarter note, but with something that's sticking out of it. We call this a flag. And the 16th note, this is the 16th note. The 16th note is presented with the same way as the 8th note, but with 2 flags. 32nd note with 3 flags, and the 64th, with 4 flags. And you can see how this works again. It's basically each time half the value of the previous note. 1 by 64th is have the value of 31 by 32nd, and this one is have the value of the 1 by 16th. This one have the value of the 8th, 4th, half, and 1, basically. And this isn't a coincidence or for no reason. That's to make the notes separated by a function that is perfectly separable in seconds. And there is, again, you can use them in a certain way where it doesn't work exactly this way. But usually we use them this way because it's easier to understand. It's better for the human ear to have the constant timing. That timing is important because if the music isn't well timed, you can hear that and it wouldn't sound as pleasant. It would sound weird. I'm going to add more things on how they're presented because if the notes are from the upper side of the staff, they're presented in a different way than they're on the lower side of the staff. The whole note doesn't change. The whole note is always presented like this. It doesn't matter if it's above or down the staff. As you can see here, this is above the staff. Not above the staff, the upper side of the staff. This is the lower side of the staff. But the half note, for example, if it's on the higher side of the staff, from the space, like from the third line and upwards, the stem goes down. It's pointed down. Again, the only reason for this is because it's easier to read this way if you have a lot of those. But if we go down, it goes upwards. And the same way it works with, hold on. The same way, this is the rest. I'll talk about that in a second. And the rest goes for the quarter note, same way. If it's from the upper side of the staff, the stem points downwards. And same goes with the eighth note and the other notes. But the flag, it looks a little weird. This is very hard to draw, by the way. This thing is not easy to draw. But it goes like this. The flag is pointed downwards. Same with the 16th note. Same with the 32nd note, and same with the 64th note. Now let's talk about how they are grouped together. The whole note, nothing changes. It's the same way, like even if they group one next to each other. In this case, we can't. Again, next video that will become more clear. But for example, if the half note is one is placed next to the other, even if it's from the upper side, it's placed next to it, nothing changes. Same with the quarter note. And also you can add another half note. It's presented like this. Nothing changes, nothing weird. One is next to the other. It becomes different when we talk about the eighth note and above that. The eighth note, if we place two eighth notes together, they are connected. The flags get connected. And in this case, they're connected in two. And I'll show a different case where they're not connected in two, they're connected in more. But in this case, they're connected in two. But for example, if we're going to connect the lower side of the staff with the upper side of the staff, this happens. The stem this time points downwards and they still connect. And that's how it works. Two notes, the two eighth notes are connected together. And that's it basically, right? The 16th note works the same way, but instead of grouping them in the groups of 2, we group them in a groups of 4. And the same way with the stem. But if we add this note now, it doesn't change, right? Because the upper note started in the downwards position. So sometimes, like if it's much lower, we do change the positioning. It would point upwards instead of downwards. For example, now this one case is upwards. But if we go much down from the lower staff, it would point downwards. Again, for the only reason because it's easier to read. Nothing functional about it other than that. So that's the 16th note. Again, same idea, just in the groups of 4. 30 seconds work the same way, but in the groups of 8. And again, it could be the other way around, right? Now, the 64th note, same idea, just connects in the group of 16th. Now this is a... Why am I connecting those to... Oh yeah, now. In groups of 16th. Which is a lot, as you can see. That's why we don't use that as much. But the idea is the more notes you add in, the more you have to play, the faster you have to play as well. and I'll present the speed in a bit. And that's how they're connected together in most cases. But if, for example, if you add an eighth note, let's say an eighth note, and next to it you play a quarter, they're not connected. And if you play an eighth note again, they're still not connected. And if you play a quarter note now, they're still not connected, but now they connect. That will become more apparent in the next video, but that's an example of how, again, they work. Now, let's hear the duration of those notes. The whole note is the longest in terms of duration, so it should sound the longest. You can clearly hear it sounded like for, let's say, for like 2 seconds, because this is a tempo of 28, 120 I mean, and I'll explain the tempo in the next video. This is a half note, which should be sounded for exactly a second in this case, but basically half as much. So in this case, this should be sounded for half a second. It disappeared. Right? This one is next to it. I'm gonna delete that. Oh wow, okay. Yeah, I'm gonna delete those. And I'm gonna add a 64th note in here. But that's an eighth note. Very fast, right? It sounded for exactly a quarter second. And the 16th note, even for a less time, you barely heard that, right? Like it. And this one is 64th, is the shortest. You barely heard that. So you can see why this one isn't used as much. They're basically used depending on how fast the song is, right? Because if the song is very, very, very slow, using a whole note is a lot of waiting. Like, let's say the song is in 40 beats per minute. Again, next video I'll explain what that means. But that's how long it will be. Again, that's usually a lot of time to wait. So it makes more sense to use the other notes. I mean, you can use it absolutely if you want your song or musical to sound this way. But when the lower the tempo is, which basically the lower the speed of the song, you usually play faster bass notes, like the half note or the quarter note. But and if you want to make really fast passages, you do use the 32nd note or the 64th, which also very fast still, as you can hear. But for fast passages, it makes more sense to use the notes that have less duration, because then you can stack a lot of notes of those. Like, you can absolutely stack. This is gonna sound horrible because 64th, but whatever. Something like that, right? But if the song is very fast, let's say, I don't know, 120, it makes less sense to use the 64th note, because playing this is humanly impossible. And also, even 16th note is very hard in most techniques, right? Some techniques, it's possible to play the 16th note at this speed. It's very hard. Like, I think probably the top players in the world can cleanly play at 16th note at 120%, at 220 tempo, because this is a hard technique. Like, the faster the song is, the harder it becomes to play it when it comes to shorter duration, because again, we're humans, we have limits. So again, yeah, that's how it works. The faster the song is, the more duration notes we'll be using. The slower the song is, the faster, like the shorter duration we're allowed to use. Again, you can use whatever, right? But you want the performer to be able to perform the goddamn song. So you need to keep that in mind. Now let's talk about ties and dots. Ties and dots basically informs the performer the note should be sounded a little longer than what it should be sounded like. And usually we like for as well to be symmetric. That's why we use the dots. So I'm gonna be presenting an example of a dot. That's the half note. And would we add a dot to it? Hold on, I'm gonna actually make you hear it without a dot. 120 is fast. Hold on. I'm going to do 60 actually to make it more of the timing. So this one should be sounded for exactly 2 seconds. Now, if we add a dot, the duration becomes longer. It becomes 3 seconds. And why is that? Because the dot adds half the value of the note to the duration. So a dotted half note is the same length as a whole note and a quarter note, but they're connected together when it comes to duration. And that's exactly what the tie does, but the tie have 2 different functions. I'll explain what is the tie. Hold on, I'm looking for a tie a beat. No, not those 2. Like this one is the same as this one. But again, the dot only adds half the value of the note to the duration. So a half adds a quarter. If we do a quarter, it adds basically a quarter and an eighth. No, not like that. Like that. And this goes on. Dotted eighth is basically like that. By the way, those I forgot to mention that those connect as well, just like the other half is not connected. Not connected by another flag because this one is an 8th note, this one is a 16th note. Same with the rest, I just forgot to mention it. That's how it works. Anyways, so you get the idea. The double dot basically adds half of the value of the duration, but also half of the value that was added. So a half double noted note is basically a half note, a quarter note, my bad, a quarter note, and an eighth note all connected. This one is the same as this one. Same goes for the quarter note. A dotted quarter note is basically a quarter note, an eighth note, and a 16th note all added together. That's the double noted note. They're more rare. They're especially more rare. Again, back then they were used a lot. Nowadays it's much less. You usually see one dotted note because we have different ways to tie those notes together, right? And that's exactly what the tie does. But the tie, hold on, I'm going to delete those. Whole note is basically this thing. The ties are used for tying not evenly split durations. Like if I want to connect a quarter, a half, and for example, a 16th or an eighth, the dot doesn't do that. The dot connects the note to a quarter. And that's why the tie is used, to make it more universal, to be able to connect as much duration as you want. But then it becomes less symmetric, usually. It depends on how you group it together, but usually it's less symmetric. And that gives an effect in the song. But usually, I'm not gonna say we avoid that. We don't avoid that. If we want the song to sound this way, we absolutely can do that. But that's one of the uses of the tie. The other uses, and I'll explain that in the next video more better. But for example, in this case, in this time signature, if I do that, that's unallowed because this is way bigger than the bar. Again, next video that would become more clear. So if I want to do a dotted whole note, what I would do is connect those together because I can do a dotted note in here in this case. So basically, if we can't fit more notes in here and we want to do we want to make the duration longer, we connect it to the next bar. We call this a bar. Again, next video. And that's how it works, basically. Now let's talk about rests, because silence is almost as important as pitch in music. So we need to perform the performer for that when we need silence, when we need the performer not to play, and for how long he should be silenced. So the same way we have a duration for how long to play, there is an equivalent way for silence. And I'm going to show you that right now. So this is a whole note. This is a whole silence. It's like basically a rectangle that's pointed upwards. We have a half note. The equivalent to that is a rectangle that's pointed downwards. Like those gets a little confusing, but the rest aren't, because they look the same. Just one points upwards, the other points downwards. You'll get used to that. The rest are more easier to point out. And we have the eighth note. And eighth silence looks like this. You've seen this a lot, probably. It's used like this is the most common silence. Again, next video. And the eighth note is presented like this, but also even they're not connected when you stack them, unlike the notes. They're not. It looks something like this. The 16th note is exactly the same way, by the way, but with two dots. Again, we can call those flags as well. With two flags. 32nd, hold on, 64. And those are it. But it works the same way in the music, right? Where in the song you're supposed to play a whole note duration, if you see a whole note stop, the same amount of time you're supposed to play that note, it's the same. You're supposed to be silenced. You shouldn't make any sound for that duration. And same way with the half note. Same with the quarter, 18th, etc. That's how it works. Last thing that we should point out on duration of music is a grace note. A grace note is basically informing the player you need to make a little sound before the bar starts. It's not it's time depending how fast the song is. It's more of a feel thing than a function that is written. But basically, the grace note, I'm going to look for that in the software. I actually have no idea if the grace note exists in the software. Yeah, this is a grace note, right? Yep, a grace note. So grace note is basically presented like this. You say before the bar starts, you need to play this note, for example. It can be anywhere, really. Like you need to play this note for for a millisecond before the music starts, just because it's an effect. It's an effect. It doesn't serve really more than just an effect. What you should understand the most is they're played quickly, usually quickly, but how they're played depends on the speed of the song, depends on the culture, depends on the instruments that were used. Again, this is more of a feel thing than something that is set in stone. So this was the notation of duration. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully you learned a lot. And subscribe to my channel. You can check my music course on Udemy, and you can also become a member. I started a membership. I probably will do only members poll where I ask which lessons do you want to do, which songs do you want me to play, and stuff like that. And again, hopefully you enjoyed the video. Subscribe and check out my other videos. I have other videos when it comes to music theory and also on playing guitar and covers. So see you in the next one.